it's April 3, 2026, and this is a meeting of the Water... 25, excuse me. Yeah, I don't need to age myself that much. So anyway, it's a meeting of the Water Sewer Task Force, and three of us are here. Personally, Carl King, Paul Tice, myself, Mayor Rupert Chase is here, and we have a couple of guests, and it doesn't look like anyone else has come in remotely at this point.
No.
I know that Jennifer said that she was unlikely to be able to. And Patrick, I guess, was unclear as to whether he'd be able to as well, depending on where he is.
And I have regrets that Tom is at home, not well today. That's why he's not with us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good. So anyway, based on the discussion at the last meeting, a couple of us have rounded up a lot of material consisting of the complete water and sewer budget material that should have been in the city report. Actually, it was all in the city report with the exception of the water expenses. When I met with Stacy the other day, we went through the report a couple times and couldn't find it, and it looked like there were pages dropped at the end of that section that should have been there. In any event, we have a complete set. And in terms of prior years, I know we were given the most recent audit report, and we all have copies of the most recent annual report. In terms of prior years, there are at least 10 years worth of those materials on the city website. So I didn't make any effort to go back through those, figuring that they're accessible if and to the extent that we need them. They're there. The other materials that I obtained were rate sheets for every adjustment from 2016 to date that has been undertaken. From 16 to 22 or 23, there were no adjustments.
Yeah.
The 2016 adjustment is the one that I sent out by email, but I don't have any paper copies of it. I didn't get a chance to do that because I got that separately and more recently than the rest of it. The other material is, other than the rate sheets, there were a couple of extracts from minutes of council meetings approving adjustments. And then there were, when I described to the folks downstairs what the 8 quarters of material that Jennifer Hawkins was asking about consisted of, they gave me these billing calculation reports that are included in those materials. And basically what those show is the amount that was billed out each quarter, and then there's a handwritten notation at the bottom of each, somewhere on each sheet, with the total number of bills and the total number of bills based on metering. And you know, the trend, generally speaking, each quarter has been that the number of meters has been creeping upwards. In the February of 25 billing, there were 1,793 bills, 1,058 of which were based on metering. May of 23, that billing, 1,789 bills and 969 meters. So it's slowly creeping up there. Stacy did point out that on the billing, and I've got some scribbled notes on it that you can probably see, on the sheet that says November 8, 2024, in the upper left-hand corner, the city has had an issue with either 6 or 8 specific metered properties where there are problems with the meters, and there, even though the sheet shows billing of $800,040.83, the actual adjusted billing was $483 $1,553.77 after resolution of a couple of the meter issues. She said that there are still either 2 or 4 of the problematic meter situations that are still outstanding. 4, but 2 of them are in properties that are empty, abandoned, not in use for one reason or another. So those are readily resolvable. The other 2 people just haven't motivated themselves to cooperate with getting the meters tested and checked and corrected yet. But the big ones were taken care of apparently in the quarter in which there was this significant adjusted billing.
John,
So basically she said the gallons and the dollars are nowhere near accurate in that one.
can I ask a question? So if the billing went from 800,000 to 483,000 down, so what are the people who have meters that aren't working properly, what are they paying? Are they paying
Well,
some rate that's lower than what they had been paying before, or are they, because the meters aren't working, are we charging them the full rate? What are we doing? Do we know?
my understanding is that they were taking, Stacy needs to correct this because I'm trying to go from memory here. But that they basically took an average based on the prior year's use, several quarters, took an average and adjusted the bill to that figure if there was no other explanation other than a meter problem in terms of any change in people's habits or usages. And on the theory that seemed to be as equitable a way as any to resolve it.
Right. I mean,
Was
that's,
there an explanation for the problem with the meter?
I don't know. She didn't know. That's basically a Tom question, I think.
right.
One that should be asked about.
Yeah. But I mean, two or three meters out of 1,000, going bad at some point is probably to be
That's an expected average. you would think.
expected.
Those figures, though, are a lot of going bad.
Right, but yeah,
So-
you would.
No, I don't buy they're to be expected. If a meter...
So I want to be careful not to turn this into a back and forth. I want to make sure that we stay focused on the agenda, whatever that is. I'm not quite sure where we're going to try and end up tonight, but I don't want to spend the evening going in circles.
Yeah, and from my perspective, the agenda tonight is basically having the people that understand numbers and data and statistics
Yep.
suggesting a methodology to us as to how we go about looking at adjusting these numbers.
Right.
We clearly have some budget information in terms of actual expenses based on past practice and allocation. We have roughly 3/4, give or take a week or two of the current year. And we can get that with a trial balance. One of the other things that I obtained that I didn't copy, or haven't copied yet, is a trial balance for the current year, which at least shows accrued expenses.
What our actuals
to
have
date.
been 3/4 of the way through.
Yeah, accrued expenses to date.
Okay.
And so we do have that.
So, I apologize, I didn't get a lot done this week because I was on the road. But a few things I did get sent out. I sent this spreadsheet. I was gonna forward it around to the entire task force once it was filled in. I sent this to Tom asking, I think I CC'd you, Rick, on this information. So for the last, from the first quarter of 2022 to the last quarter of 2024, some numbers that we're gonna need. We're gonna need total water produced. We're gonna need total water billed, and then total wastewater treated to start figuring out, one, if our unmetered accounts are getting charged fairly. Two, to try to do a rough estimation of unaccounted for water loss. And then with that unaccounted for water loss, we need to, the average right now nationwide is which it's sad, but is about a 14% unaccounted for water loss and nationwide.
Okay.
Myself, I don't find that acceptable, but some systems do,
Is that based on the difference between what's produced at the plant, so to speak, and what's measured in meters going into
Right.
the users,
Right.
where everybody's metered?
Right. Well, that, and then they do leak studies on top of it.
Yeah.
So, leak studies will determine a lot. But for right now, we've got just numbers to work with, So my thought is, if we take what we've pumped into the system, we take what we've billed based on meters, we back 14% out of what we've pumped into the system, that balance, at this point, it's about all we've got to work with. Is taking an average.
Because until everybody's metered, we really have no
Right.
idea.
Right, and like I stated in the last meeting, it's great, it will be great to have everybody metered, but it's a double-edged sword. You could get everybody metered and find out we're in a bigger deficit than we were.
And we thought we were.
Yeah. I just have a sneaking suspicion that there's a lot more riding on the backs of the people that aren't metered right now than the people that are. But we need these numbers to determine that.
Okay.
Or to start to determine that. And then,
So Paul, just say, if Tom's back in the office, I will meet with him tomorrow morning before I leave town
Yep.
and just impress upon him that we really want these numbers ASAP.
and I can,
He indicated to me earlier in the week that he shouldn't have any trouble getting that, I think.
yeah, I
I
didn't,
think he sent it to Jason
yeah.
over at the treatment facility and was expecting an answer back.
Yeah, and I do have another list of questions for Tom. Well, I should have made copies, I'm sorry, I didn't. I just brought one copy I was gonna give to Tom. I've got a bunch of questions that'll help us in looking at, now that we have the complete water budget, will help us looking at if those numbers are divided properly. If we're accounting for the right amount of equipment, the right people, all that stuff, and developing a more accurate picture. I'm not saying it's not accurate, but we need to do our due diligence and make sure that it is. So I've got questions for Tom. Like, he said that they're doing, the city is doing, any connections, they're digging the hole, doing the connection for new services and stuff like that. So my, question is, okay, well, I don't believe our water department owns the backhoe, owns the trench box, and that's probably the street department that owns that equipment. So is the street department billing the water department, or stuff like that?
Each equipment in that regard was in 3 different ways, I think he billed.
Right, but if let's just arbitrarily pick a backhoe, right? If a backhoe, the cost of a backhoe is split a third between water and a third between wastewater and a third between streets, but the water department uses that backhoe once a year, is that fair to the water rate? Or should there be interdepartmental billing?
Yeah.
I think we did address that last time, because he mentioned an excavator with that same Because he only uses that on the water and sewer primarily.
Yeah, some of that is luck of the draw each year, depending on where the leakages and breaks and
Oh, yeah.
other issues are. Yeah, just thinking of street maintenance and whatnot, I would think water and sewer would certainly use the bigger part of the digging tools, you know, as opposed to plows and that kind of thing, but
Right.
he would have some idea
Well,
of that. But historically, I think they've divided it between the different departments rather than doing interdepartmental billing. The other thing I know they divide is labor. Stacy showed me a timesheet.
Yeah.
And maybe she can get us a blank timesheet, but she showed me a timesheet, blacked out the name of the person and showed how they all track their time in terms of, it's broken down even more than public works, water, sewer. It also splits out recreation, it splits out a whole series of categories.
Right.
And it even is detailed enough that it breaks out Prouty Beach versus the park. Anyway, it's an extremely detailed timesheet that each public works employee fills out, so that they do it, so that when they do the actuals, they have a really good handle on which department they're charging to.
Quite a defined breakdown. Easy.
Right.
Right. And so, and I'm not implying that, you know, anybody's doing anything wrong. I'm saying that as a task force, we need to evaluate all of it.
Right, yeah.
And if they're using, you know, so when I had sent the email for asking if there were budget worksheets and stuff, let me grab the budget here. So what I was referring to, so, and I'm leaning on my history. Like if you were to, so in the past, when I've always developed budgets, say like, let's pick somebody to pick on. If you were gonna put a number in for line item 226, truck and equipment rental, so that would be account number 850-6466. There would actually be a worksheet detailing how many times you plan to rent a truck for that budget year, how many times you are gonna rent a backhoe or a trench box, so that when you develop the next year's budget, you could see if your ballpark, you know, it's not just
It gets tighter and tighter year after year.
you don't just say, well, you know, probably gonna throw this in there. You know, there's an actual worksheet and an actual breakdown for each budget. That's what I was referring to when I said a worksheet. Now, worksheets are work, but they help. So I mean, I'll ask Tom when he's better. I'm assuming they historically do not do any type of worksheet like that.
Yeah, I believe
I
they
asked
said
him pretty
that.
directly.
You did, okay.
I think the answer is no.
Yeah, do they base each year?
Ann's tried to chime in too, I think we should.
I just, to your point, I learned just recently, when we have decided to install soon a water sprayer or something like that in the rec department, in the park, in Gardner Park. And they came down to an object that would use 8,000 gallons per season, per the season. And I said, if you're going to use 8,000 gallons of water, who's paying for the water? And the rec department said, we never pay for the water. So for anything that is in the park or near Prouty Beach, it could very well be, if you check it out, that they never pay for the water. That would mean that the water department, water and sewage is absorbing the cost of a city function. And that may be in other departments. I mean, for instance, the fire department, when it fills up its truck, I don't know whether or not it gets paid by the city or water and sewer just giving these things away for free.
Right. Well,
It's almost like the water and sewer departments are the stepchild of the city in terms of them getting paid for various things like water that they wind up using in fire or in rec. For instance.
Okay, wait, so I'm gonna, again, I wanna be careful not to go so far in one direction that we lose track of the overall plan,
Right.
so.
so just real quick. Historically, I mean, fire's fire. I've never seen a water system that worries about what the fire department uses. It's the nature of the beast.
Okay.
But if to the rec department stuff, if that is unmetered, that's going to show as a water loss, which isn't good. I mean, for this, my opinion, if the city wants to give other departments water, that's fine, but you need to account for the amount of water they're using. Otherwise, it shows up as unaccounted for water loss and goes onto the back of the ratepayers, which isn't good.
Prouty Beach uses a lot
Yeah.
because they have showers and
Yeah.
washing machines and a ton of other stuff.
And that's part of the questions that
Yeah.
we need to dive into.
Yeah, so that gets back to the idea that maybe there should be an interdepartmental transfer. I asked Stacy the other day if another concept, rather than trying to divide all of these things, would just be to lump all of these expenses into public works and charge the water department, for instance, as though it had no staff whatsoever and contracted everything out to a third party. And anyway, the response was that would create other kinds of administrative, interdepartmental bookkeeping
Nightmares.
nightmares. And
So,
yeah, and in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't solve the underlying problem, which is how do you price the water and sewer product appropriately?
right.
And you know, it would make perfect sense to me that the rec department, you know, that there be some kind of an interdepartmental transfer and that be built into the rec department budget, because presumably, I shouldn't say presumably, but I would expect that most of the folks that are taking showers at Prouty Beach are campers who are paying for the privilege of being there.
Right.
And maybe that needs to be built in some way into the, whatever the campers pay to stay there.
Right. Yeah. There. You know, looking at these line items, I have a lot of questions because there's a lot of vagueness. You know, still haven't. I asked this in a council meeting before the task force, but the private haulers for wastewater, we still don't know how many we see annually or what they're getting charged and who's charging them.
Right, yeah.
You know, that could be a big dollar amount. And if we're not charging them because if it's too much of a hardship, then we need to address that hardship so that they're paying their fair share.
I know they pay something, I just don't know what. And
Right.
that's really a Tom question in terms of how that's handled.
And
'Cause there aren't that many private septic haulers that come
Right.
into Newport. There's two primary ones and then a
Right.
couple of smaller, more occasional ones.
but I have to believe we're where they come, you know, for all those.
For sure.
We are,
Yeah.
I remember being told at one time by one of them that they tend to come here as opposed to some of the smaller plants, because the smaller plants don't have the necessary equipment and connections to be able to unload the truck,
Yeah.
whereas this plant does have
Right.
that connection, and this plant also has the connection to be able to pump out RVs and travel trailers and that sort of thing. Whereas some of the smaller ones around do not.
Right.
So, and there's some kind of fee schedule for that, but again, I don't know what it is. That would be a Tom question as to how that's handled and how payment is made. I don't know if people pull out a credit card when they show up, or if, the regular haulers are
Right.
probably billed periodically. I know they're billed regularly, and we just don't know
Right.
what the rates in the system are, and that may be a little bit more complicated than just a per gallon billing, in the sense that the sewer ordinance suggests that there's a possibility that when you're unloading something more intense that has a higher BOD count, that the rate can be different.
Yep.
And so that comes into play as well.
And then on the flip side of the coin too, on the water side, I mean, I don't know how many private water haulers we have filling pools. How are those being accounted for? How are they getting built? Do we have a hydrant set up somewhere with a meter on it, with a start and an end? So, you know, a bunch of questions to sort of fine tune, once we have these numbers, to sort of fine tune what is actually being accounted for and what's not.
Yeah, I know the pool company that serviced the pool that we had when we lived in Derby had a contract with the Derby Center Water Company to use a specific
Yeah.
location near the Rural Edge Mobile Home Park on Shattuck's Hill.
Yep.
There was a specific connection there that they were authorized to use, and there was some method of keeping track of their loads and
Right.
whatnot.
Right.
That they
That's probably metered ahead. then.
paid as long as they used that connection.
Right. Yeah,
There's
because,
a hydrant right at the entrance to Mountain View up by my house. And I haven't seen it in a while, but Newport Center used to come in and fill up a tanker at that hydrant. And there was some deal that they had with the city to buy the water specifically from that hydrant for Newport
Yeah.
Center.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. So
Paul,
Because they present.
as I look at this, I have to admit that this budget, where I feel like I went pretty deep on the operating budget in the last few months, I have not looked closely at this, and so it would be helpful to me if you could just kind of do a kind of I don't know, maybe a 10,000-foot view
Right.
about what the questions are that come up for you as you look down through this, because I'm not sure I can even name what the questions are. Like, I'm sure that I can't.
So, you know, going through, let's start at the beginning. So, what would be, you know, I see water rents and sewer user fees. Well, what would be helpful for me would be, you know, sewer fees, residential sewer fees, commercial, sewer fees for the haulers, to get a breakdown. So, you know, because say we just arbitrarily took one of these actuals and divided by our sewer rate, and it doesn't match up to what we actually filtered, well, where is the extra sewer coming from? We don't know.
Right.
The same on your water rents. Where is, what percentage is residential? What percentage is commercial? Are we seeing more? It would help to see where your growth is, where everything else is, you know, in the private haulers. Are we seeing a lot of private haulers? So And I gotta admit, until today, I just barely got back to.
It's okay, I'm not looking for that.
Right.
And honestly, Paul, if your answer is, I want a week to really look
Right.
at this, that's fine with me.
Well, I will definitely have more questions in a week, for sure.
But like, those two questions are great. Then
Good starters.
I think that works for me.
Well, and they're certainly important information in terms of knowing,
Yeah.
what percentage is tied up in those things. I mean, just from a driving around town frequently point of view, I mean, there are septic haulers at the plant almost every day unloading trucks.
For sure.
And,
Yes.
And I thought he said there was a code, right? They punch in, that's how they knew who it was. So there's some sort of tracking going on.
Okay, we just need to find out what it is.
Right.
Right.
Find out
'Cause they're right there
where do they
for the
keep those numbers? And somebody's got to know how much that was.
Right.
yeah, they have a system, I mean, way back before Derby and Newport were connected, in this way that they are now, many years ago, there was actually a setup where Taplins, when they were on the Derby Road, they had the ability to unload their trucks directly at their garage into the system. And they had some payment system, but that was all shut down on the theory that requiring them to come into Newport like all the other haulers resulted in a more accurate
Yep.
measurement
Yep.
as to what they were putting in, and it also gave the plant operators more control in terms of blending
Yeah.
the septage with whatever was coming into the plant at the time.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to understand any of the chemistry behind it, but apparently there are details in terms of how you blend the more intense loads in with the general run-of-the-mill
Right.
material that
Yeah.
comes into the plant
Yeah.
from the point of view of operating the plant.
This is very small. This is nothing big, but one thing that jumped out to me was that, if you look at employee costs, your certified operators, water and sewer, need a certain amount of credits every year. They need recertifications. But I see nothing in the budget for education and training, safety. So where is all that stuff? Is it coming? What's it coming out of? Is it coming out of the water and sewer budget, or is it coming out of a general account somewhere for general employee training? Because if it is, that really should be moved over to the water and sewer because it's water and sewer specific.
And I'm assuming Jason, I believe is the name, has to be certified with running that.
Well, that was another question. How many certified wastewater treatment plant operators do we have? How many water system operators do we have? I forget for a well system what class operator you have to be. But
If I remember correctly, Jason's a class 3,
Right.
that sounds right.
and we have to have him. Like, if we lose him, we're really in trouble.
Right,
And
yeah.
there was a big.
So we only have
issue around
one?
that.
There's only one person in there, I believe.
I don't know. Let's not
Yep.
speculate. Let's make sure we
Yep.
get good information.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I don't see anything in here that specifically mentions education. There's a category called
Right.
professional fees without knowing what that is,
Right.
whether that's where education is or whether it's something else entirely.
Right.
Oh, wait a minute. I did find education in one place here. Sorry. Second pass, under personnel expense, it's line item 95090.14.
So that's out of the water and
But it
sewer.
says 0.
Yeah. So that's just a very small example, but the devil's in the details, right? And the more we can, break, because I'll be honest, when I started looking at the annual report and I saw water meters under sewer expenses, it's like,
Yeah.
so I was really happy to get this budget.
Yeah.
But it's just a lot of questions, and that's where the worksheets, right? The worksheets come in very handy, because there's compared to budgets I'm used to, there's a deliberate vagueness in this budget. There needs there really should be more detail.
Yeah, it fell short of my expectations by a long shot. Again, you identified questions that should be on line items of how much, let's say, recreation is using, how much each department is using, where's it going? Fire department, that's also inclusive to our loss. Even though we're not charging, we need to know where the water's going so we can, accurately, again, to the tail end.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for those and department end uses like Proudy Beach, I would think meters again, if they're not there already, meters would resolve the issue.
Now, on next breakdown, you know what showers are using, what watering flowers is using, so on, so hoses.
You know,
There's a laundromat over there, I believe, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we need to know the difference between showers and laundromats. We just need to know how much is being used at Proudy Beach. Period.
You know, and on both systems obviously have SCADA systems, supervisory control and data acquisition systems. I'm assuming they're running on PLCs, but I haven't asked that question yet. Are we programming our own PLCs, or are we paying somebody to do it? If we are paying for them, where is it in the
What's a
budget?
PLC?
Programmable logic controller. Just a lot of, it would probably be good if Tom and I just,
That's what I'm thinking. The more you speak, the more I think what we really need is not to keep sending Tom off with a bunch of questions.
Right.
Rather, we need you to come in and sit down with Tom for a couple hours and just keep dogging this stuff, and then come back to all of us with a bunch of both answers and potential recommendations.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I'm happy to do that. It would need to be on a morning, some morning, but
Tom loves mornings. You can come in here at 6 a.m. and he'll be here.
yeah. But yeah,
Can I ask a more general question?
absolutely.
I keep hearing from a variety of people about the importance of either including or not including depreciation in these budgets. And I confess that I don't fully understand the issue. And I would love it if somebody could help me understand. My understanding is that in general, you want your depreciation in a budget because you are in fact depreciating equipment over time that's going to have to be replaced, right? It's not worth as much. But that also depreciation can really skew your understanding of what your expenses are year over year.
Right.
So I would just love your perspective, anybody's perspective, on how that ought to work and whether or not that comports with what we've actually got a practice of doing here.
Well, my background is from the operating budget side of things. I'll be perfectly honest, depreciation is something that I am not well versed in. Hopefully nobody takes offense to this. I left that to the bean counters. You know?
Right, because at the end of the day, it's a question about what your capital assets are.
You got it.
Right, I understand.
It did
So,
not play a role in our operations or anything like that.
okay, so can somebody help me understand, what does this budget that we're looking at include and not include around depreciation? Does it have depreciation in it?
It has no depreciation in
Right.
it whatsoever.
That's what I thought, because I went through it and couldn't find it and wondered what I was missing.
The statute provides, and the ordinance, I spent some time reading through the ordinances, which total 40 or 50 pages, and looking at the statute. The statute contemplates creating reserves or sinking funds to deal with equipment. And I know in the nonprofit sector, depreciation has to be taken into account in terms of value of equipment and useful life. And,
That's right,
and
that's
where,
what I'm used to.
And where you have regulatory requirements that mandate that certain items of equipment be turned over at certain intervals, if you don't take depreciation into account and deal with some mechanism for accounting for the capital expense, then the budgets are skewed. as well. I suspect there are accounting rules that the auditors could explain that address the depreciation issue in the context of the reserve fund provisions of the state.
Well, just so you know, I sent a note to
state-
the auditors this afternoon saying I'd like a meeting to have some education from them.
Yeah, I think that's actually probably needed for both of these committees
I agree.
in terms of understanding that issue, because funding replacements through sinking funds is something the city's obviously done for some things over the years.
But not everything and never, and not fully.
And, right, and the ordinances actually contemplate that, and one of them is even more complicated than that. Let me just see if I can.
While you're looking, I'll just say, so I worked for 12 years managing a $2.5 million operation conference center for the National Presbyterian Church that was buried inside a $78 million overall budget. And it drove me nuts because they would dun us every year out of our operating budget for depreciation, but they would never put aside money to replace the things that they were depreciating. And they couldn't understand why I was angry about that. I kept saying, 5 years from now, when I need a new van or I need to replace a furnace, there's going to be no money to do it, and you've charged me every year for the loss of the value of that equipment out of my operating budget.
Yeah. So,
And we go through a lot of equipment fast up here too.
Yes.
you know, ideally, all this would play into, you know, the city really should, especially on the water and sewer side, have at least a 10-year, but preferably a 20-year master plan where you've got those goalposts where you're setting aside your capital reserve funds, and then every year you reassess, you know, your master plan. That's what we did. Is we had a 20-year master plan, and we in our rate was a certain percentage that went into the capital reserve fund every year, so that we were continually paying for what we needed. We weren't beholden to the state or anybody. We did it on our own. So if there weren't grants, we
So
could,
that 10 years from now, you're not saying to the community residents,
Yeah, opponent.
Right.
we need 30 million bucks,
exactly.
let's go borrow it.
Right.
And by the way, the money that you thought was in the capital funds.
Doesn't exist.
Is gone.
Well, and after with a loan too, you want to see good fiscal responsibility. You did put something to a percentage saved away, so if you did need to get a full purchase of the equipment.
Because you did that, Carl, it vanished, it evaporated.
Right.
Yeah, and the city does have a 5-year capital plan. There's, I've forgotten the exact basis of it, but there's this state statute somewhere that contemplates that municipalities set up a 5-year plan. Not all municipalities have any plan, but Newport does have a 5-year plan. I know we were shown it each year at the Planning Commission. Not that we had any role other than if you see any big omission,
We're interested.
comment. Other than that, it was just for information. But in the sewer ordinance, there's another zinger, which says, annually, the city council shall cause to be included in the city general fund budget an amount sufficient for repayment of costs of development and construction of the city of Newport public sewerage system.
Wow, right there.
So that's supposed to be coming out of the operating budget every year.
So the general funds is where, capital construction is supposed to be funded from. And then it appears that it gets figured back into the rates, and there's a transfer from sewer to general fund to pay bonds, presumably, or loans for capital equipment. And then the next section, wait a minute, I didn't finish reading that. And then there's a sentence in that same section that says tax-exempt property and federal, state, or municipal properties connected to the City of Newport public sewerage system shall be subject to sewer rents for the discharge of debt service in the manner provided by 24 VSA Section 3615, which I brought with me and can look up. And then they're supposed to set a user charge rate in dollars per 1,000 gallons, which is to cover the payment of costs of operating, maintaining, and repairing the system, applied to actual consumption of water by that user as metered by the city, or applied to an estimated consumption for non-metered single-family residential users equal to 200 gallons per unit per day, or such other amount as established by the city as being a reasonable estimate for average water use by a single-family residential unit. And then annually, the city shall establish a minimum total annual user charge for residential and non-residential uses, sufficient to cover administrative expenses relating to billing, bookkeeping, etc. And supposedly,
12.5%.
and supposedly the bookkeeping is
That's the 12.5%.
is intended to be detailed enough that, and this is another quote, any excess revenues collected from a class of users shall be credited to that class of users in establishing revised rates.
Yep.
So, and subsequent years, so supposing residential users pay $50,000 too much toward administrative overhead, then
Next year-
presumably they get a break spread across the user base in that amount. And
We've never seen it.
I was gonna say, do we get
well, I
some money
mean,
back?
costs never go down. And then there's a state statute that apparently says all revenues received from sewer rents, which is the term used in the state law, including interest and penalties thereof, shall be credited to the city general fund for the payment of debt service, and all revenues received from user charges shall be credited to a special fund known as the sewer department account. So in other words, the sewer component of the bill needs to include this base called sewer rent, which goes toward the capital items, roughly speaking, and a separate item called user charges, which deals with the variable items, the cost of operation, essentially.
Yeah.
But that's the complicated formula is what this actually says.
This is in the charter? Is that what you're
No,
reading?
it's in the ordinance. It's in the ordinance, which was adopted February 22, 1984.
How far from that path have we gone?
Okay, this is, I mean, it's really helpful actually to have you, it makes my head explode, but it's helpful
Well,
because,
I was asking, I was operating under the premise that there must be ordinances somewhere because of the 6-inch thick pile of random material that Dennis Chonette gave me from his time on the city council pertaining to water and sewer that I spent 2 Sundays ago sorting out all day and making piles. And I found rough drafts of a water ordinance, but no indication that one was ever adopted. So I was asking downstairs and Jim said, oh yeah, we've got these things here somewhere. And yesterday he came up with them. And so on May 7th, 2012, there is a 36-page water ordinance that was adopted.
When?
2012.
2002? 2012?
Yeah, May 7, 2012, got a copy right here.
and you sent those to us?
Not yet, no, my office scanner is dead, so I'm
We
bringing
got a fast scanner here.
stuff home to scan, and I just hadn't gotten to these yet.
So,
But this May 7, 2012 water ordinance repealed the April 1923 ordinance as amended. I have a copy of the 1923 ordinance. It's 3 pages, double spaced.
and this one's 36 pages.
This one's 36 pages, single spaced within paragraphs. But anyhow, this was adopted in 2012, and the financial provisions, the very first part of it addresses set aside sinking and capital reserve funds to finance future major maintenance and/or replacement costs and plant or distribution system expansion or upgrade costs. And so it talks about establishing a sinking fund, which is where we backdoor into depreciation.
Yes.
And then it talks about, and the sinking fund, and there's a state statute on this that I came across today. The sinking fund needs to be factored into the rates somehow, and the sinking fund, capital reserve fund, can be added to each year in an amount not to exceed 15% of the normal total budgeted expenses for maintenance and replacement in that year. And the sinking fund is supposed to be maintained in a separate bank account.
There's a lot, man. There's a few funds that should be separate.
And let's see. And then it talks about a water base rate and a water use rate. Same concept as sewer, you know, base and use.
Yeah.
And then all properties that are connected are to be charged the base rate, whether or not the property is occupied and there's any actual consumption. The mere fact that you're connected to the system, even if it's, say, an empty house,
Yes. I think that practice is
Yeah.
happening.
you get charged the base rate regardless.
That happens.
And that's pretty typical in most towns around here.
Here's a question, as you read this, John, that I'd be interested in your fine tooth comb reading. It's becoming more and more clear to me, this week in particular, that we're gonna have to, I don't see any way we're gonna get out of the financial mess we're in without borrowing, without creating some kind of a loan, a bond, something for what I would call at this point, capital stabilization. And one of my questions would be, what are the regulations in that ordinance? Are there any regulations that would impact our legal ability to do so and to charge that back to the users? It's clearly saying we can do it for future expenditures with a sinking fund. The question is, can we do it for the decade of
Well, if the system's running a deficit, you have to fund the deficit somehow. You either raise rates umpteen 100% to cover it, or you borrow it and then pay it back over time.
Okay, that's the conclusion I'm arriving at.
Yeah, and I haven't delved into this enough yet. but-
Okay, just know that that's got to be. I'll just
A
say,
long-term quick fix.
this isn't going to be a secret for long. So I'll just say, I'm going to have to tell the finance committee this tomorrow night as well. I think we're going to have a potential for deficit spending mode as soon as in the next couple of months. And the reason for that is that at least and I think I'm not the only one, I think other people around the council table and the treasurer's office have operated under the illusion that our $2.8 million line of credit is revolving. So here's the implication. In 2024, the council approved us extending to a $2.8 million line of credit. Later that summer, we borrowed up to $2.4 million of it. That was the maximum that we hit. In the fall, the treasurer, with certainly my tacit approval, paid that down by almost $1 million when there was cash to do so. And then reborrowed just a few months ago another $400,000. So our current balance on the line of credit is $1.8 million. All of that is great. Here's the bad news. I thought we had $1 million left so that we could manage cash flow for a couple of months to get through the end of the year while we come up with a long-term strategy. That's not true.
It's not a revolving.
It's not a revolving fund. Therefore, we've already borrowed $2.75 million against the $2.8 million, and there's only $50,000 available to us between now and the end of the year. on that line of credit. Even though we only owe 1.8, we've borrowed 2.75.
So it's not a revolving line of credit?
It is not a revolving line of credit, and what I was told at the bank is that that's because municipalities are actually forbidden to use a revolving line of credit, at least in that instance. It has to be a classic line of credit that just adds together everything you've borrowed against it, and then that's what's due at the end of the year, you know.
Well, that makes sense, because if you borrow over a certain amount of money, you're supposed to go to the citizens and get approval to borrow a certain amount of money. And the concept of the line of credit almost violates that, and that's why the line of credit...
That's why it's not allowed.
That's why the line of credit has to be paid back at the end of the year.
Right, so right now...
And you're getting away with the line of credit without going to the citizens.
Well, not for long, because we're at the end of that. I mean, we're gonna, right now, if we paid that line of credit off tomorrow, it'd be $1.8 million on top of our regular operating expenses, which we clearly don't have the money to do. So we're gonna have to, the finance team is gonna have to come up with a recommendation for how we're gonna manage that short-term shortfall and what we're gonna do about the long-term situation, so that because there's no reasonable scenario in which at the end of the fiscal year, we simply get a new $2.8 million line of credit and transfer $1.8 million of our debt into that line. That's not gonna work.
Well, and ultimately, I mean, I have no idea what current short-term versus long-term municipal interest rates are, but wouldn't the interest rate be a lot more favorable on a bond than
It sure
a
would.
line?
So I have a call out, an email out to try and have a conversation with the Vermont Bond Bank folks tomorrow. I don't know what get tomorrow, but they've responded and said they'll find a time in the next week to have a conversation. So we'll begin to get an answer to that question. And I spent some time on the phone today with the financial experts at VLCT, who helped me to come up with the list of questions that I think we want to ask. And I've now reached out to the auditors so I can better understand kind of where we are. And I'm trying to figure out, as I have these conversations, which parts of them I should just do first to get my own head around it, and then find ways to bring them in to meet with our task forces and the council. But the situation is definitely more dire than I realized. I'm not, there's going to be a way out of this if we're honest about it and we deal with it. We're going to find a way to deal with it. I'm confident of that. But I thought we had several months of breathing space that does not appear to exist at this point. So the reason that question that you're looking at, that set of questions you raised with the ordinance, matter to me is because we're going to have to figure out, once we borrow, let's say we go to the voters, we get permission for some kind of a capital stabilization bond. The question is, how does that get paid back? And my guess is it's going to have to be paid back probably through water and sewer rates over the next 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that it would all come out of water and sewer, but I guess it depends on what the actual deficit number for water and sewer as opposed to the general fund is.
Right, so that's right. I mean, that's part of our challenge too. At least as far as I can tell, as I look at the numbers in the annual reports, the general fund has covered its own expenses with property tax year after year. I understand, I'll just say quickly, I understand that there were expenses inappropriately moved from general, or in hindsight, it looks as if inappropriately moved from general fund into the water and sewer budget. I don't know, honestly, how we're going to deal with that. It seems to me that at this point, all we can do is say, year after year, there was a water and sewer budget that had this much expense. The councils approved year after year that, or didn't approve, however that water, I get it, and please, I get it, right? However it happened, water and sewer budgets moved forward without a rate adjustment. And the only way I know how to deal with this is to say, this is the amount that got inappropriately, this is the deficit amount that got created year over year. And it was attributed appropriately or inappropriately to water and sewer.
Right.
And people who should have been paying attention to it appeared not to be paying attention to it. I'm willing to say that much, right? But what matters to me now is, how do we get out of it and move forward.
And I don't know that you can go back and recharacterize and reallocate the past. I think you have to live with the past. The real issue is coming up with more appropriate allocations going forward.
That's exactly my point.
Yeah, and as far as the past goes, once there's a general determination as to what percentage of the deficit is water and sewer versus general fund, then that should determine the way that bond repayment is divided among the funds. You know,
So,
in other words,
okay,
if
so
60%
let me-
is water and sewer,
Yeah.
then.
So let me just say, so what I think I'm beginning to come to is, and Paul, I'm really kind of looking at you for part of the answer to this question, is that we really have two different questions. One question that I think you really have a lot of expertise to help us answer is, next year, we know what the cost of water and sewer is projected to be, unless we want to make any adjustments as we go through that budget with a fine-tooth comb, right? And we know what it's going to cost us to run the operation, and we know how many users we have, and we're getting as much information as we can about what the cost per gallon of water is and that kind of thing, right? And therefore, for next year, the goal of this group in the next 3 weeks should be to say, what rate must we set for metered, unmetered, what commercial, residential, whatever combination of things go into it, that will assure that we have no deficit in 25-26 fiscal year. That's, I think, the work of this group. And then, in consultation with us, the finance group tomorrow has got to take on the question that I'm raising, which may impact us, because if we go out and borrow money, it may impact next year's water and sewer budget, right? Or expense, whether or not the budget's been approved. So I think that's what I'm coming to, is it's got to be a two-pronged approach to this. But I'd love to hear what y'all think about that.
Yeah, and I'm frankly not sure how we could come up with any real rational number in 3 weeks.
Yeah,
That's almost impossible. I think what we're really probably looking at is just coming up with an arbitrary percentage on an interim basis, implementing it, and then seeing where we come out this year.
And assuring the public,
After July
the
1st.
residents, that we will adjust again in the fall
If necessary.
based on the how close we've gotten.
Right. And the other, you know, the other part of it is that water and sewer rates in the city of Newport, at least based on my experience of having looked at them in the course of real estate deals in almost every town in the Northeast Kingdom, Newport City has historically had among the lowest water and sewer rates in our part of the state, if not the entire state. And so from that perspective, you know, at least compared to the competition, as it were,
Right.
we certainly have some room to move.
That's another thing with the question of where that model that has information and data we can pull from. There's got to be a system around there, somewhere in the state that's comparable to us, that we could get a worksheet, a spreadsheet from them saying, well, this is how they're budgeting, this is how their line items look, and this is what the breakdown looks like.
I think probably the best thing to do would be see if we can get Tom to reach out to Liz Royer. I believe she's still the executive director of Vermont Rural Water, but I think they compile that stuff. I don't know if I still have her
really great
contact
help.
information.
So
or not,
I think
but-
I have it, because that was one of the names, or one of the organizations that VLCT gave me this afternoon and said these folks can probably help you.
Well, that was
Yeah.
going to be my question. Did they offer any
Yeah,
stuff?
I've worked with Liz in the past. I mean, she'll be very helpful. I could see.
Can I just say, it may very well be, and I'm very happy that we're going forward and changing the rate to pay for current expenses and next year's expenses. But it may very well be, having used for many years the borrow from Peter to pay Paul, which is how we got away with not touching our line of credit for all of those years. And the city paying for the, quote, deficit in water over all of those years, allegedly, that there is no mechanism to go back and get water and sewer to pay for the monies that were never collected 10 years ago, 9 years ago, 8 years ago. There may be no real mechanism to go back and get that money, and that the taxpayer may be the one who has to pay to straighten things out, as opposed to thinking about doubling water and sewer rates to do it. So somebody would need to find out if legally you can go back any number of years and now get...
That's what I'm asking about the ordinance.
Yes. But I mean legally, state-wise, and legally,
Well, that's-
all those things wise, because as I read the charter, things were supposed to settle every year, and if it couldn't settle every year, the council was supposed to go to the citizens at that point each year and say, hey, we don't have enough money here. Will you give us a special allotment extra of money? That didn't happen for all of the years. And that may be because council ignored it. That may be because council was never apprised of what was really going on. But it may be a done deal and it gone. And then if we have to pay money, the taxpayers may have to be the ones who front that bill. Just a thought.
That's a city attorney question, and depending on what they have to say, it may be a bond counsel question in terms of structuring a bond.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
But we are facing a hard reality no matter what.
Clearly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, this year, to finalize this year, we're gonna have to bite some sort of bullet.
And the other thing I would say is the process of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, whatever fund you were going, they were going in to take the money out and then put the money back when they got the taxes in, has got to stop. It cannot ever happen again.
I believe we're gonna identify a lot of these shortcomings and where oversight should have been. We're gonna identify that, and it's certainly gonna be practices put forward.
So I'll just say, Ann, to that, just so you know, on Monday night, one of the things that we are going to ask the council to do is to authorize creating 2 new bank accounts. One for USDA grant funds coming in because they require a separate fund. And the second for all other grant funds, with the exception of CDBG, because it has its own fund already. And I've already made it very clear downstairs that I can't imagine an appropriate situation where those grant funds land in the general operating fund going forward. That those funds have to be segregated within 24 hours. If they've arrived in the wrong account, they've got to be moved within 24 hours, and they ought to be arriving in the right account.
And ditto for capital funds,
All of it.
sinking funds,
well,
because they all got
yes,
sunk right up.
I agree, but that's an Act 2. I mean, the first, for me, what's legally restricted immediately is any grant funds, and that's where we have real trouble.
Right.
Then there's a question about committed funds, which are really sinking funds, right? And we're going to need to answer that set of questions also. But I'm trying to eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? So,
Yeah.
Can we get back
Sorry.
to water and sewer?
sorry.
Can I just tell you, I want to answer a question for you, I think.
Okay.
I was looking through the budget and I can't find anywhere in Public Works for any training, or water and sewer for any training.
Right.
There's training in the other place, in like police and fire.
Yep.
But there's not, I can't find any training in those two. And then also like Prouty Beach and Gardner Park both have what are called utility parts of the budget, but who knows, is that just water? Is that electric? Is that sewer? What is that?
Right.
So it's there, but we don't know what it is.
Right. And that's what I meant about the vagueness.
Go on with detail, because
Right.
because obviously it would be easy enough to get a breakdown between how much do you pay for electric at Prouty Beach versus
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
what goes through.
Paul, are you in town next week? You're not traveling?
I am done traveling.
Okay, so I think the likelihood is, like, I could write to Tom tonight and just say, hey, Tom, I'd really like you to try and set aside a couple of hours some morning next week
Yeah,
with Paul.
that's fine. Yeah.
Is there a day, time that would work best for you?
Just have them reach out to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna copy you on it. I just want to kind of,
Yeah.
because I'm leaving town, so I don't want to try and manage this from phone.
Is there any way that I could attend that as well too on the days able? Because that'd be interesting. That'd be a learning curve for me as well
Yeah, I
too.
would think so.
Probably, yeah.
I wanted to just briefly respond to your concern about sewer, the water meters being charged to both water and sewer. The theory behind that was that since the sewer rate was just a multiple of the water, but when the meter is read,
Yeah.
it reads technically water
Right.
and then the multiple of sewerage, so they charged both water and sewer.
Well, it's water coming in and then there's rate on water going out.
Right.
Yes,
And they gotta be-
nobody measures water going out.
Yeah, it's based on some percentage of
Right.
water coming in, on the theory that
Exactly.
some of the water,
Yeah.
And if you look at the amount that's budgeted for meters and then look at the actual, there's a whopping difference.
Right.
And that's back through almost
Because
10 years.
on the,
yeah, so obviously they underspent on meter installation, and that money just went into some other operating
right.
expense, just got moved to a different line item. The other
Just got doubled.
The other interesting thing is that somewhere I saw where the equivalent user was based on 13,500 gallons per
13,500.
house per quarter.
yeah.
And in another place, 200 gallons per day. Well, the state wastewater system and potable water supply rules uses a different formula entirely, which is that the design flow for a single-family residence shall be calculated based on a minimum of 2 bedrooms, regardless of whether the residence contains only 1 bedroom. So 2 is the minimum, and it's based on 70 gallons per day per person, with so a 2-bedroom would be 70 times 4, because the definition is 2 persons per bedroom. So 70 times 4 is about 280.
Yeah.
If you have a 3-bedroom house, it's based on the premise of 70 times 6, 420 gallons per day. And then each bedroom beyond 3, 1 person per bedroom. That's the formula that they use when they issue permits to people who are building or renovating residential structures.
It sounds like we're
Is that
gonna.
the state rule?
Yeah, I got that today. That's
And
it.
does that state rule apply to every city, even if we have our own ordinance different from that?
Well, this is for all new construction in terms of how they figure it for permitting purposes. So let's say you buy a vacant lot that doesn't have a state wastewater permit. The wastewater rules are intended primarily to deal with people that need their own septic systems and wells, but anybody who has access to city services is still forced to get one from the state. And part of the process of getting one, if you have city water and sewer, is that you go to Tom and you have to buy an allocation based on the number of bedrooms. So a 3-bedroom house, 420 gallons per day of allocation, but then the equivalent user system is based on 200 gallons per day, which comes out of some other state rules. It's just inconsistent.
Yeah.
And the actual use, in many cases, is closer, for a lot of folks, is closer to the 200 than the 420.
Sure.
But they commit the system based on 420.
Sounds like we're gonna be doing a lot of restructuring.
So I can understand why somebody would try to make that argument about water meters being in both, but water meters are part of the water system. It's just the way it is,
I'm just telling you what the rationale was.
Yeah.
We knew this, we didn't buy the rationale.
Okay. So yeah, back on something John said, 3 weeks from now is very ambitious. I mean, I will give you all I got to try to, to meet that goal, but I'm not a person that likes to, I'm not gonna rubber stamp a number to just get us over the hump, So I think we'll get close. We'll get close.
So actually, that's all I'm asking, right, is I'm willing personally, as
Yeah.
mayor of Newport, to
Yeah.
take some heat, which I expect will happen
Yes.
when people say, there's no rationale and how can you do this? And there'll be a billion things that people want to say to critique this.
Right.
My answer is going to be, we're doing the best we can in a limited time to be responsible for a very significant challenge. And we will come back and adjust as appropriate 6 months from now based on new information. That's going to be the answer. And in the meantime, people are just going to have to live with it.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost certain, unless we come up with an absolutely, insane percentage, that whatever figure we come up with is probably going to be on the low side in terms of the bigger picture.
Well, for sure, right, because we don't know how to answer the big picture question yet, right? So, like I said, from my perspective, at the moment, if all we did by the 1st of May was say, we're going to deal with the numbers we have in front of us, and we're going to make sure that next year's budget we get as close as we can on the income side to match the expense side, that's good enough for me to get started. And then 6 months from now, we're going to know a lot more about how we solve the bigger picture financial question and where that money gets appropriately attributed. And we'll answer that question when we get there.
And you're, at this point, you're only looking at the user fees. We're not, once we get past this, then we'll dig into connection fees and that stuff. Is that your?
I think that's probably right. I don't know how in the world we could take on the rest of that stuff. And the truth is, I mean, I could be wrong. You can probably educate me pretty quickly about this, but we do not have a lot of new user connections going on around here at this point.
No, and honestly, if you did, you'd be giving them away at the rates that are set right there.
Right.
So, okay. I mean, because I have some thoughts for simplifying the rate structure
Yep.
in the city.
Yep.
Their thoughts right now, so I'm not going to
That's
throw
fine.
them out.
You don't feel you got to put them out there.
But I think there's some money that's being let go the way the rate structure is set up right now.
Okay.
That doesn't need to be let go. But
And can I just say one more thing about kind of the rate question?
Yeah.
It's not lost on me that in a total void of information, I was the council member who said we've got to do something 6 months ago, and I continued the 26% rate increase that had been started as I came onto council for non-metered versus 6% increase for metered. And I took a lot of heat for it, and my answer was tough because no one was giving me information and no action was way worse than action.
Right.
Having said that, I would love to address that inequity. If it exists, if your gut feeling that you started us out with tonight is right, and that there is an inequity that exists there, I would love to see that addressed in 3 weeks when we say this is how we're going to deal with the next set of questions.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
So by next week, if you and Tom have had a chance to sit down and Carl's been with you, we can hopefully have a lot more answers to these questions. And in the meantime, John, I think going deeper on the ordinance and trying to figure out what the other state statutes are about those other questions.
Absolutely.
Like what can appropriately be from past deficit spending or deficit budgets, what can appropriately be attributed to water and sewer going forward? That's a great question that you're probably better prepared than anybody else to help us figure out how to answer.
And all I may come back with is this is way out of my bailiwick, and you need to be talking to the folks at Stitzel Page who
It also would be fair to say, with respect to the ordinances, those were just decided by a council
That's right.
then. And if you came up with something that you felt was justified and equitable now,
It would be
the
appropriate
ordinance-
13 years
the
later.
ordinance might have to be changed to make it,
Absolutely, that's right. It's not charter.
we're not bound.
The bar is not like a charter bar.
Particularly as none of the councils, and I've sat in the meetings for the councils from about 2012 up till now, none of them have bought into being a water commissioner, which is part of the job description.
Right.
They truly haven't.
So John, can you, at some point you'll scan
I
those?
can
and-
actually scan all of the ordinance material and send that out.
That would be
And
awesome.
then I'll dig around in the state statutes and scan all of the cross references there. And
If I line up a meeting, John, with somebody at the Vermont Bond Bank and somebody else and our attorneys, it might be useful to actually have you in that meeting with me if you'd be willing.
if we can make the schedule work, sure.
Okay, I'll do what I can to include you, because I don't feel like, not, at some point soon, my head really is going to explode. Like, we need some more people in this picture.
That's being responsible, I didn't want to say that.
I do have a question. Paul, you said you have some concerns about the rates. Is that water and sewer? 'Cause-
Right now, it's more water, the way that the waters are structured.
Right.
I think there's no need to have
Too many
them
variables in the model.
that many things for water. And then I haven't really looked, so
Well, I mean-
bear with me, Lori.
No, it's okay. No, the reason I'm asking is because I can't remember if our deficit is more on the water side or the sewer
No, I think it's
side.
more on the sewer side, right? Haven't we been running higher deficits on the sewer side overall?
It will, I mean, I don't know what the percentages are, but if all the water meters were where they were supposed to be in the water budget and not 25,000 in the sewer budget,
Right.
Yeah.
things are going to move a little bit.
Well, the other part of it has to do with just the past sources of income pertaining to water versus sewer.
Well, true, because we lost that money from, or we gave up the money from the sale.
Right.
What are each rates right now?
Exactly.
Is water rate
And
right
there
now?
was no adjustment made at that point in time because clearly that money was subsidizing and holding the rate down,
Right.
theoretically holding the rate down for everybody else. And when that money was lost, the expense of running the system certainly didn't drop by the same amount by any stretch.
But nor did it get redistributed.
No, so that's that, yeah, right. So that's certainly, a component of the issue that's potentially pretty significant, given that it was, what, 160, 180,000 a
It's
year.
185,000. And why would a city wait 6 years, bleed everything else dry before even going, oh, maybe there's a problem?
Well, the other thing that gets left out is that in addition to the general fund for many years having a surplus that could be eaten into, water and sewer had a surplus.
Also had a surplus.
For years. So we could we could lose this amount of money, 180 here or some other amount of money there, and it wouldn't matter because the budget wouldn't balance at the end, but the surplus could take care of it. It was only when we exhausted all the surpluses and then started borrowing from other areas within budgets that this happened.
And there is
So one big piece for the water system, I mean, you've got the water tank out here. That's a painted steel tank. There should be money being set aside for that every year. I don't see it in there because at some point it's going to need to be repainted and it's going to need to be blasted. It's going to need to be contained and it's
just
going to
did
be
that.
expensive.
We did that,
we paid 90,000 a year or something for several
There
years.
was
Yeah,
a
that was what,
fund at one time.
We are still
before
paying.
2000, right?
I used to do that.
We're paying
Before 2000?
We paid, we got a
2020.
contract for 15 years. I'm not agreeing with the contract, but it paid up, and we are still in the midst of that contract.
Right.
It paid $90,000 for the first 5 years to this company, and I think they painted the tower during that period, and we now pay about $30,000 for the next 10 years, and I'm not quite sure of how much upkeep they're going to
Okay.
do, but that's
So-
where you see some sort of payment.
So the city is in a contract with,
I don't remember the name of the company.
But it's in here, it's in this budget?
Yeah, it would be under loans, it might be in the loan area.
in water.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Am I in water?
One of the things that changed in the budgets, if you look at the budgets back from 2010 to about 2015, things were itemized. That changed. It was not an accident that it changed, and now we have big clumps of stuff that it's
Water tower maintenance contract,
You got it? Where is it?
line 284.
And I'm not sure how many times
24,800.
they're willing to paint, but that might include it. Oops. Yeah, and you can see it dropped from the 93,000 and the
Well, I can't remember the
115
name of
was
that
the year
company.
change. I think it's up to 30
Because I've
that
worked
we're
with them
now.
before.
25 or 30.
24,800 is the proposed for FY 25-26.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah.
Which didn't get adjusted at all, it might as well be, I mean, so, this actually, Paul, here's one more question.
Yep.
You know, Ann's plea that has been consistent is not lost on me, which is that at some point, I believe Ann's right, that the council needs to take responsibility and say, yes, this is our water and sewer budget. And we have not yet done that formally for 25-26. So as we set rates at the end of April, it would be really nice for us to say, to the best of our knowledge, this budget is as real as we can get it right now, and we approve it for the coming year. And then build it into the process next year.
In history, the council has only done that once.
A year ago, right?
Yeah. And that's outrageous.
So, I mean, that's, for me, to see that contract in there, that's, if it's the company I'm thinking of, that's a good deal, that's a good contract. Painted steel water towers are not cheap to maintain.
Yeah.
There's no cheap water tower to maintain. I mean, even the Aqua Store we're putting up, they have issues from time to time. It's the luck of the draw, right? Concrete's the same thing. But I think that's part of what we need to look at in this rate analysis is forecast out.
Yeah.
Try to forecast, just ask Tom to forecast out 3 years, something. What do you see coming in the next 3 years that this rate needs to account for?
Satisfied,
Yeah.
yeah.
My sense of him is he's pretty good at that, actually.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
even though we may not see it here, you know, when I press Tom, he often has a gut that's, you know, and I actually trust that gut in a lot of ways. Now, I think the question is, how do we actually get stuff to back it up?
Right, and I think we can. I think that, you know, if we can, I don't know how the council would feel, but if we, you know, if we pull that line out of sewer and make the water meters all in water, and we do a little bit of forecasting under the capital expenditures, you know, is everything that you see, that he sees in the next 3 years, let's go small snapshot for now,
Yeah.
in there. If not, let's put it in there.
Yep.
Let's, for rate forecasting, understanding that it's a rate forecast budget, it's not the current operating budget.
Yeah.
And is some of that forecasting in the city's current 5-year plan? I don't know
Right.
the answer to that question.
I don't either. Though I'd be surprised if it wasn't.
Or does the 5-year plan focus solely on general fund?
But
I-
also, you realize that the state has a definite formula for what a rate is. A rate is only to pay for current operating expenses and a bond that would qualify under the second section. And the second section is what John was talking about. You can only set aside 15%.
Yeah,
So that all has to be structured in. It can't be more than,
right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're forecasting more than what 15% can cover, you've got to start re-looking at what you're forecasting.
And that's
Bump this to there.
I was confused a little bit by this when you read it, John. What's the 15% of what?
It is for capital.
Capital expenditures, sinking
But,
funds.
no, I know what it's for. I'm asking, like, what's the percentage?
it can't be more than 15% of what you're really collecting for just
You gotta put
expenses.
15% away.
What you're taking in?
Right.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah, to really simplify it, that's what it amounts to is
Yeah.
you set your gross budget at a level that allows setting aside 15% in a capital fund. And that's based on the state statute, and whether that actually makes sense in terms of what things really cost is sort of beside the point. That's the cap. And if reality exceeds that, then you have to figure out some other.
That's when you have to go borrow or take it from somewhere else.
You either borrow or take it from somewhere else to make it work.
Okay,
And if you borrow it, then you can easily figure it into the following year's budgets. You figure the payments into it.
Right.
And other departments should be using that formula as well to put stuff aside for their.
Well, yeah, I mean, whether that formula makes sense for all types of activity is another question. There are certainly some categories of activity that it makes 0 sense for.
Right. Well, whatever.
Such as replacing, police cruisers, say.
or a Vector truck.
Or front ends on plow trucks.
Right.
You're looking at more like 50% for some of those things.
Okay, I feel like I'm getting smarter little by little, and I really appreciate the questions we're asking.
Yep.
So I've sent that email
Okay.
and copied both of you on it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and we'll set it, Carl, at Paul and Tom's convenience, and then welcome you if you can make it.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And I'm just right down the road in here.
Yep. Okay.
Good. Are there any other questions tonight, or should we look at wrapping up?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
Yeah, I think so. I think we have enough.
So much to digest,
Yeah.
and I understand.
Yeah.
But it really seems like we're gonna almost start over restructuring kind of how it's really supposed to be. Make it apply.
Well,
Good.
we'll
So
get there.
same time, same place
Sounds good to me.
next week.